a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Bath School Disaster. The Bath School Disaster, sometimes known as the Bath School Massacre, was a series of violent attacks perpetrated by Andrew Kehoe on May 18, 1927, in Bath Township, Michigan, which killed 38 elementary school children and 6 adults and injured at least 58 other people. Kehoe killed his wife and firebombed his farm, then detonated an explosion in the Bath Consolidated School before committing suicide by detonating a final device in his truck. Andrew Kehoe was the 55-year-old school board treasurer and was angered by increased taxes and his defeat in the spring 1926 election for township clerk. He was thought to have planned his murderous revenge. After that public defeat, he had a reputation for difficulty on the school board and in personal dealings. In addition, he was notified that his mortgage was going to be foreclosed upon in June 1926. For much of the next year, a neighbor noticed that he had stopped working on his farm and thought that he might be planning suicide. During that period, Kehoe purchased explosives and discreetly planted them on his property and under the school. Kehoe murdered his wife Nellie sometime between May 16 and the morning of May 18, 1927. She had just been discharged from the hospital with an undefined illness. He then detonated various incendiary devices on his homestead on the morning of May 18, at about 8:45 a.m., causing the house and other farm buildings to be destroyed by the explosives blasts and subsequent fires. Almost simultaneously, an explosion devastated the north wing of the Bath Consolidated School building, killing 36 schoolchildren and 2 teachers. Kehoe had used a timed detonator to ignite hundreds of pounds of dynamite and incendiary pyrotol, which he had secretly planted inside the school over the course of many months. As rescuers began working at the school, Kehoe drove up, stopped, and used a rifle to detonate dynamite inside his shrapnel-filled truck, killing himself, the school superintendent, and several others nearby, as well as injuring more bystanders. During rescue efforts at the school, searchers discovered an additional 500 pounds of unexploded dynamite and pyrotol connected to a timing device set to detonate at the same time as the first explosions. The material was hidden throughout the basement of the south wing. Kehoe had apparently intended to blow up and destroy the entire school. Bath Township. Bath Township is a small community located 10 miles northeast of Lansing, Michigan, which contains the unincorporated village of Bath. The area was primarily agricultural in the early 1920s. In the early part of the 20th century, many small one-room schools were closed, where different grades shared the same classroom and teacher. Educators of the era believed that children would receive a better and more complete education if students could attend a single school at one location. The grades could be age-divided into classes, and the facilities could be of a higher quality. After years of debate, Bath Township voters approved creation of the Consolidated School District in 1922, along with the increase in property taxes to pay for the new school. When the school opened, it had 236 students enrolled in grades 1-12. All area landowners had to pay higher property taxes. At the time of the bombing, the village had about 300 residents. Andrew Kehoe. Andrew Philip Kehoe was born in Tecumseh, Michigan, on February 1, 1872, into a family of 13 children. He attended the local high school in Tecumseh. After graduating high school, Kehoe studied electrical engineering at Michigan State College in East Lansing and moved to St. Louis, Missouri, where he worked as an electrician. After several years in Missouri, he returned to Michigan and his father's farm. After his mother's death, Kehoe's father Philip had married a much younger widow, and they had a daughter together. In September 1911, as his stepmother was attempting to light the family's oil stove, it exploded and set her body on fire. Kehoe threw a bucket of water on her, but the fire was oil-based and his actions spread the flames more rapidly over her body. She died from her injuries. Some of his neighbors believed that Kehoe had caused the stove explosion. After his stepmother's death, Andrew Kehoe married Ellen Nellie Price in 1912 at the age of 40. 7 years later, they moved to a farm outside the village of Bath. Kehoe was said to be dependable, doing favors and volunteer work for his neighbors. But they also described him as being impatient with all who disagreed with him. They recounted that he had shot and killed a neighbor's dog that had come on his property and annoyed him by barking. He was known to have beaten one of his horses to death when it did not perform as well as he wanted. Kehoe had a reputation for frugality, and he was elected in 1924 as a trustee on a school board for 3 years and treasurer for 1 year. He argued endlessly for lower taxes, and later superintendent of the board M.W. Keyes said that he fought the expenditure of money for the most necessary equipment. He was considered extremely difficult to work with, often voting against the rest of the board and wanting his own way. He repeatedly accused Superintendent Emery Hike of financial mismanagement. He argued with township financial authorities, trying to get the valuation of his property reduced, and claimed that he had paid too much for the farm. He also tried to get the mortgage taken off, but was not successful. In June 1926, he was notified that the mortgage company was going to foreclose on his property. Kehoe was appointed in 1925 to temporarily fill the position of town clerk, but he was defeated in the spring 1926 election several months later. This public rejection by the community angered him. Monty J. Ellsworth said in his eyewitness account the Bath School disaster that he thought that this rejection was the reason that Kehoe had planned his murderous revenge of the bombings to destroy the school and kill the community's children and many of its members. Kehoe's neighbor A. McMullen noted that Kehoe had stopped working on his farm altogether for most of the preceding year, and he thought that he might be planning suicide. Kehoe had given him one of his horses about April 1927, but McMullen returned it for this reason. It was discovered later that Kehoe had cut all his wire fences as part of his preparations to destroy his farm, girdling young shade trees to kill them and cutting off his grapevine plants before putting them back on their stumps to hide the damage. He gathered lumber and other materials and put them in the tool shed, which he later exploded with an incendiary bomb. By the time of the bombing, Nellie Kehoe had become chronically ill with what resembled tuberculosis, for which there was no effective treatment or cure. Her frequent hospital stays may have contributed to the family's debt. Kehoe had ceased making mortgage and homeowners insurance payments months earlier. Purchase and planting of explosives. There is no clear indication when Kehoe conceived and planned the steps leading to his massacre of schoolchildren and townspeople, but his neighbor M.J. Ellsworth thought that Kehoe conceived his plan after being defeated in early 1926 for the election as town clerk. The general consensus of the townspeople was that he had worked on his plan at least since August of the previous year. Bath School Board member M.W. Keyes was quoted by the New York Times. Kehoe had free access to the building during the summer vacation of 1926. From mid-1926, he began buying more than a ton of pyrotol, an incendiary explosive used by farmers during the era for excavation and burning debris. In November 1926, he drove to Lansing and bought 2 boxes of dynamite at a sporting goods store. Dynamite was also commonly used on farms, so his purchase of small amounts of explosives at different stores and on different dates did not raise any suspicions. Neighbors reported hearing explosions set off on the farm, with one even calling him the dynamite farmer. Kehoe purchased a .30 caliber Winchester bolt-action rifle in December 1926, according to the testimony of Lieutenant Lyle Morse, a Michigan State Police investigator with the Department of Public Safety. Prior to the disaster. Prior to May 18, Kehoe had loaded the back seat of his truck with metal debris capable of producing shrapnel during an explosion. He also bought a new set of tires for his truck to avoid breaking down when transporting the explosives. He made many trips to Lansing for more explosives, as well as to the school, town, and his house. A neighbor allegedly saw Kehoe carrying objects into the school building at night numerous times, but never thought to mention it to anyone. Nellie Kehoe was discharged from Lansing's St. Lawrence Hospital on May 16, and her husband murdered her sometime between her release and the bombings 2 days later. He put her body in a wheelbarrow located in the rear of the farm's chicken coop, where it was found in a heavily charred condition after the farm explosions and fire. Piled around the cart were silverware and a metal cash box. Ashes of several banknotes could be seen through a slit in the cash box. Kehoe had placed and wired homemade pyrotol firebombs in the house and all the buildings of the farm. The burned remains of his 2 horses were found tied in their enclosures with their legs wired together to prevent their rescue during the fire. Farm bombs. At approximately 8:45 a.m. Kehoe detonated the firebombs in his house and farm buildings, causing some debris to fly into a neighbor's poultry brooding house. Neighbors noticed the fire, and volunteers rushed to the scene. A fireman named O.H. Bush and several other men crawled through a broken window of the farmhouse in search of survivors. When they determined that no one was in the house, they salvaged what furniture they could before the fire spread into the living room. Bush discovered dynamite in the corner. He picked up an armful of explosives and handed it to one of the men. As Kehoe left his burning farm and house in his Ford truck, he stopped to tell those fighting the fire, "Boys, you're my friends. You better get out of here. You better head down to the school," and drove off. North Wing explosion. Classes began at 8:30 a.m. Kehoe had set an alarm clock in the basement of the north wing of the school, and remotely detonated the dynamite and pyrotol which he had hidden there at about 8:45 a.m. Rescuers heading to the scene of the Kehoe farm fire heard the explosion at the school building, turned back, and headed toward the school. Parents within the rural community also began rushing to the school. The school building had turned into a war zone with 38 people killed in the initial explosion, mostly children. First-grade teacher Bernice Sterling told an Associated Press reporter that the explosion was like an earthquake. The north wing of the school had collapsed. Parts of the walls had crumbled, and the edge of the roof had fallen to the ground. Monty Ellsworth, a neighbor of the Kehoes, recounted. Ellsworth volunteered to drive back to his farm and get a rope heavy enough to pull the school roof off the children's bodies. Returning to his farm, he saw Kehoe driving in the opposite direction, heading toward the school. He grinned and waved his hand, Ellsworth said. When he grinned, I could see both rows of his teeth. The scene was chaotic at the school building. Eyewitness Robert Gates said. Truck explosion. Kehoe drove up to the school about half an hour after the explosion. He saw Superintendent Hike and summoned him over to his truck. Charles Horson testified at the inquest that he saw the 2 men struggle over some type of long gun before Kehoe detonated the dynamite stored in his truck, killing himself, Superintendent Hike, Nelson McFarren, and Cleo Clayton, an 80-year-old second grader. Clayton had survived the first blast and had wandered out of the school building debris. He was killed by the fragmentation from the exploding vehicle. The explosion also mortally wounded Postmaster Glenn O. Smith, who lost a leg and died later that day of his wounds, and injured several others. After Kehoe's truck exploded, Ellsworth recounted. O.H. Bush, foreman of the road crew, recalled the scene after the final explosion. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?